right, Andres, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate the time, everybody. Andres Traslavina is the head of executive recruiting at Whole Foods Market in Austin. We've had some good conversations, Andres. I always enjoy our talks and thought we could do it here about some of the happenings in recruiting and talent acquisition.
Yes, thank you for having me, Nick. Excited to do this.
Awesome. Well, I think maybe one of the topics I'd like to talk about today is just a little bit about maybe the mystique around executive recruitment, right? I think, what does that mean? How might that be different than other types of recruiters or talent acquisition professionals who are talking to, professional folks or managers about opportunities and things like that? Is there different techniques? Is there different approaches when you start to think about like executive search?
Yeah, sure. I think maybe we can talk a little bit about the candidates and the attributes that they need to bring to a role like this, right? Usually these candidates are leading large organizations. Sometimes they sit on the C-suite. They make big decisions for a company. And the two aspects of these roles have to do with vision, understanding a vision, sometimes coming up with a vision or translating that vision to a large group, to an org. And the other piece that's important is inspiring people to follow that vision. So, as it relates to leadership, right, whether it's in tech, marketing, legal, HR, leaders, for the most part, will have to depend on people that report into them for the technical aspects of it. So executive recruiting focuses on bringing people to a company that can do those two things, right? Is it different as it relates to the approach of finding folks? I think so. The searches are, for the most part, confidential, meaning that you won't see a posting out there for a CEO or a COO or a VP of a large function. The candidates that are usually qualified for these roles are not candidates that are looking, that may be interested in pursuing things, but as recruiters, you have to use a headhunting approach, which is the word that is used commonly out there. Find people, and depending on the timing, there's a lot of variables that make this possible, that all this starts into align. Then you start engaging a person and start a process that usually takes 3 to 6 months. I mean, these processes can take a long time, different than maybe some of the hiring processes for other roles. But yeah, the exclusivity of the search it's part of the success. And these are big decisions. Usually we're making executives maybe move from another state. These roles are very influential. So from both sides, the candidate needs to be sure about coming to a company with her eyes wide open, and vice versa. The company needs to ensure that they're bringing someone to the company at this level that it's a calculated risk. So just in a nutshell, those are some of the nuances.
That's fascinating. Yeah, when you think about, like, some of these jobs aren't even advertised, so you may not post the job on a site for whatever reason. Maybe it's strategic, or maybe it's someone's in that role currently and there's a timeline. And then you're right, people not posting their jobs publicly at that level. So you're also limited from a sourcing capacity of how do you even find and source and reach out to some of these folks, right? There's some limitations there.
What I can tell you that part of the success depends on the recruiter's personal brand and network as well. Yep. And I've been doing this for quite a few years. I don't want to give up my age, but when a candidate looks at your profile, right, it speaks about the company, how you represent the company, and how you as a recruiter is not just a person offering or talking about a job, but someone that strategically can explain the business, and can become an advocate for the candidate. So as you do more, it's like flying hours. Like pilots become more experts at their fly, and as you do more interviews, as you talk to folks, you become more of an expert. And it's a little different to when you are an in-house executive recruiter as opposed to a search consultant. I have partnered with search consultants in the past. I think they bring other type of intelligence. However, if a candidate has someone on the inside that understands the nuances from a matrix perspective, it moves faster, and it is that much more valuable, right?
We talk a lot about recruiter phone screens at Honeit and just the importance of that conversation in the interview process. It's typically the first conversation. It sets your talent bar, in terms of that candidate judging your organization as who you can hire, right? That recruiter is the spokesperson, right? And explaining the role and articulating the team. And to your point, explaining how this role might impact the business or how it impacts other organizations in the greater company. But yeah, I think it's very telling, that it is a human touch, and it is that kind of recruiter's personal brand, not just the company brand. I mean, Whole Foods Market is obviously a great company. We all know the logo. We all love shopping there. I was going to ask you how that impacts you, right? You have this big brand on your shoulders, but it's also your personal brand. What can we talk about Whole Foods? I mean, maybe we shift a little bit to the Whole Foods company, right? Where it's an interesting brand. It's a technology company. It's a supply chain situation. It's got two types of employees, let's say, to oversimplify it, where you have the workers in the stores, and then you also have kind of corporate organizations. Talk to me a little bit about Whole Foods Market and how your approach to hiring may have changed with COVID, how COVID maybe has impacted it, or are you seeing kind of, now that you figured it out, it's back to normal? Where are we at with hiring?
Yes, it's not going to go back to normal. We have adopted a new way to look at everything: operations, hiring, developing, and engaging candidates, right? But so we have, more than 100,000 team members, just a little more, in 3 different countries. We have 7 stores in the UK. We have some stores in Canada. Most of our stores here are in the US, more than 530 stores. And as you know, we were acquired by Amazon back in 2017. So as it relates to the scale of the company, we have different segments and markets and jobs available, depending on if there are store level roles. And within the store, right, we have leadership level roles at the store. We have frontline level roles. We have highly specialized roles at the stores. For instance, a meat cutter or a cake decorator. These are very hard to find roles that are within the store. We also have facility and distribution center roles, which are a complete different dynamic. Something interesting about our facilities and distribution centers, those are some of our most engaged team members. It's funny how once you have a distribution center, and usually the people that come as part of the center maybe come from referrals from their families. They have a lot of fun at the distribution center. It's hard work, it's physical work. But once they are there, they tend to stay. They tend to bring more people like them. And we have an amazing retail ops leader that, understands people from the ground. So, there are so many dynamics. And then you have the corporate roles. And within the corporate roles, you have, the analyst entry-level roles. You have some interns. You have some roles that are, that rotate pretty often, that are support roles. And then you have the roles that are very special or that fall within an especially category. Software engineers, we have a legal team, obviously attorneys, oftentimes fall into that category, data scientists, and then you have leaders that lead this specialty teams, right? So the approach to recruit for each of those roles has to be different, and it creates some challenges depending also on the location, right? Um, Depending on how quickly the role turns. So there is not a silver bullet to recruit for Whole Foods Market in general. What I can tell you though is that we have the advantage of having the stores. People can go to the stores and they can leave the brand. They can see team members working at the store. They can see if Whole Foods Market is a place where they may aspire to work at some point, or they may see one of their daughters or nieces or nephews, right? When an executive goes through our run line, they can't picture themselves maybe working at Whole Foods. So it's a huge asset to bring the brand closer to the customer, and that unified brand spreads across the board, right? So and I'm sorry I didn't answer your question about COVID. Of course it created a lot of challenges, right?
Yeah.
I don't know where some people are right now, but as you know, no matter how much we increase the minimum wage, we still can't find enough people. So there is a supply and demand issue for frontline level roles, and it's critical, because when you depend on people working at these retail stores, and we can't find enough people to apply and to get hired for these roles, you compromise some of the experience, and we have to be creative and now think about shifts, think about maximizing the team member base that we have. And our recruiting team is going at full cylinders, trying to, attract, engage, simplify the process, because this is where the most challenges exist at the front line, high volume hiring, right? You mentioned that we are a tech company, and I love to think that we are a tech company, but for some people that have been mostly exposed to, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Meta, Netflix, or the FAANG companies, since when they go to college, because that's when these companies go and recruit. As an engineer, all you're thinking is, okay, for me to become a very successful engineer, I have to be in one of these FAANG companies. Whole Foods Market doesn't make the list, right? Because we just haven't been in front of them. But as we are becoming a tech company, the challenge is that we're now competing with talent that most of these tech companies are needing and attracting. So then we need to become very competitive as it relates to our total comp package, our benefits, and our offerings, right? But what I can tell you is that people want purpose. People want to work with caring leaders. People do want to make a lot of money. I mean, in these careers, you can, make a lot of money. But at the end of the day, people want to be in a company where they can be a part of something bigger than themselves and have meaning in the work that we do. And I think that's where we have an edge.
That's fantastic. And I think most folks kind of know, and I would think savvy engineers would start to pick up. I think there's been a shift, right? For the last 10, 15 years, all these internet companies, there's been a lot of infrastructure and tools to help create and scale companies online. And then I think there's been a big disconnect with like physical goods and things like that. So, I mean, I think you're in a really interesting place where to be able to solve challenges around supply chain and how do you get a physical good made here to a store here, that's just a big challenge. And it's not just ones and zeros, right? My wife started a swimsuit company and was working on that for a couple of years. And it was just fascinating. I've been in the world of tech and think, oh, we add a new user. Oh, easy. Click a button. Add a new customer. create an account, and forgetting that, like, when you think about the inputs of physical goods, it's so much more complicated. You gotta buy the material, ship the material, put it together, make it, get it, like all of those steps that obviously Whole Foods has probably mastered at this point. But I would think looking at some of those steps in a new lens and figuring out what technology can help or enhance or streamline or automate. I mean, obviously Amazon is the king of that, right? In terms of getting something from one place to another. So I think that's technical, new types of technical challenges. Yeah,
they're the king of it, but what they're really good at is at creating amazing transactions, right? When you buy shoes or a table or all these things that you buy from Amazon, sometimes things that we don't need, but they get here so quickly, sometimes a day before you expect them, and the transaction is flawless, right? And then if something goes wrong with it, you send it back. You get a refund back once you put it in the store. I mean, it's a perfect transaction. But to create an experience with food, with your sushi, with your tomatoes, with your apples, if I get my delivery wrong here, I may have a problem with my wife because dinner is going to be not the same. Can I take it back? Sure. But it's preserving and creating experiences while maintaining a transaction that is flawless. That is a challenge that, most retailers doing what we do are facing. But engineers I'm glad you mentioned the supply chain and seeing products, from beginning to end. Like, we've been able to attract engineers because they want to be a part of that challenge, right?
That's a big ambitious goal. Like, that's a big, that's something you'd want to kind of connect yourself with. And I think you're right with Whole Foods too. There might be challenges you face more than other types of supermarkets when you're talking about fresh fruit and obviously produce and organic things that don't last as long on the shelves, or preserving that experience with no preservatives, right? Like, like how do you do that? So, well, yeah, I think it's fascinating. And then, so in your role, like, and in your team, the executive search team that's internal within the kind of corporate recruiting organization, you talked about all these different parts. Will they pull you in to say, hey, Andres, we need someone to kind of create a new supply chain operations situation, or there's some challenge to be solved there? Would they pull in your team to say, here's the role, here's the problem, go help us find someone wherever that is in the organization? Or do you focus on specific?
No, I serve the company across all the organization, and these roles, VP level and above, are not coming open that often. So, but when there is a need, regardless of the function, our team will go. And it's a very strategic relationship with the team. It's helped that I've been in a Whole Food market for 8 years, right? The more that you get to know the company, our leaders, the faster that you can move, and the more trust that you can build in getting the team leader to know if someone that you're recommending is someone worth speaking with. I've loved using Honeit because it's allowed me to have an additional tool to be agile when I do my interviews, to send quick highlights. In doing what we do, we need to persuade and influence at the highest level. So it's different, for me to write a nice note, a nice summary, than to send somebody's testimony via voice through a highlight that is not me interpreting some things. And by the way, but when you interpret things, when you write a summary, some things may be missed, right, during that process. So you can go back to that highlight and analyze things and be persuasive in ways that are very, very unique. So
I love that. Well, thank you for the Honeit plug. I think you're right. A lot of that recruiter hiring manager relationship, whether it's an individual contributor role, a management role, or in your case, executive leadership type roles, it's understanding the problem that this person is going to be solving and trying to understand that with your conversations with the candidate. Can they do this? Have they done this? Do they have transferable skills to do that here with our organization? So part of recruiter's job is kind of understanding that from the recruiter phone screen and that conversation with the candidate. And you're right. The other point is, I just hung up the phone with someone. How do I effectively communicate to this hiring leader or someone who didn't just hear what I heard, why they're a good fit, And I think you're right. For 30 years, we've been typing notes and paragraphs to try to summarize a phone call or a video call. And it just seems to fall short, right? And I think you're right. We remove some of the opinion or my interpretation of what a candidate said and just share what the candidate said about that.
Yeah, no, and I think I've shared this with you before. I love doing interviews, and it's my favorite part of the job, because you learn from executives. Everybody has a story. Every company has nuances, and you get to speak about some really cool strategic initiatives that people share with you. So this is intelligence for our hiring leaders, for our teams, right? Maybe the candidate is not the right person for the role, but if I can learn a little bit more about how other companies are approaching this, how the function is structured, that's intelligence, which, by the way, serves me to become more useful as I have more conversations with our leaders, right? And the more you do it, the more you know, and you can relate to candidates that are coming from that same company, for future roles, and they may think that you know a lot, but it's
You've
part
heard
of
so many answers to the same question, right? Like I think
it's part of
we talk about those structured
yeah.
call guys where it's like you ask the same question about a strategy question. Let's put it in the lens of in a grocery, that the industry of grocery stores. You're asking some operations person, what's some insight you've rolled out or innovation you rolled out to streamline or shorten time? And one person talks about this thing, and the other person talks about another innovation they did. Another person talks about another innovation. And now you've just become kind of an expert in solutions to this particular thing because you've talked to 8 people and you've heard 8 great answers to that particular question, and then it's like, how do we slice and dice that? Or to your point, that becomes like business intelligence, right?
Absolutely.
Business more
and real-time business intelligence. Like right now, I can tell you we are doing we're doing an exercise around compensation and survey and market data. It's quite obsolete, especially during this time when the market is moving so fast, when companies are doing, bending backwards to be aggressive and recruit candidates. And this surveys usually come in the fall, right? By the time the surveys come and we do the number crunching and we aggregate the data, as it relates to salaries, I mean, the most accurate and effective and up-to-date data is the data that you hear from when you're talking to candidates. And as you know, you can't ask someone what they make, but you can ask what they aspire to make.
Sure.
And when you interview enough and you have a theme, it's not because one person wants, between this and this range, but when you have consistency in the responses from 20 people, you have a case. You have a case, and you can accelerate things. You can educate your business partners. And I think that's the only way to do it, especially when in some areas we have been not as aggressive because we just haven't been recruiting engineers for the last 40 years or data scientists, right? It's relatively an area that came along during the last 5 or 7 years.
I love it. Yeah, I love the idea that our conversations are more than just they're insights, they're interview intelligence, they're essentially business intelligence. We talk a lot about that at Honeit, trying to kind of get people to realize that there's information that you can unlock in these calls that just hasn't typically been captured.
Yeah. With Honeit and with any other tool, it's like a gym, right? I believe that the tool has so much to offer, but you have to put the work, right? You have to, as a user, you have to do the highlights. You have to ensure that you maximize the efficiency of the tool. Otherwise, it's just like a gym with amazing equipment that if it's not used, you
Nobody's
don't gain
lifting.
any muscle, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Maybe we could shift topics just a little bit. I know you're a big advocate of diversity and inclusion and equity. I read a lot of your tweets and posts and things like that you're sharing publicly, which I think is fantastic. I also love kind of the Whole Foods lens on this topic, which I think you've done a great job with on the career site. This idea of bring your whole self to work. I think that's just a wonderful tagline. I also like the idea of kind of growing your career, right? I think I love when companies invest time to think about their career site and put time and effort and don't just kind of slap open jobs on it. And so you guys have done a great job, but I guess would love to hear a little bit more maybe about Whole Foods philosophy on the topic, what your maybe personal thoughts are on DEI, and maybe how you're trying to add awareness and improve that, make that shift internally with your candidates or with your colleagues and folks across the HR team.
Yeah, I think for a very long time, Whole Foods Market has been known as the premier organic and natural retailer in its sector. And when you have stores that look as beautiful, and when you feel the vibe and you see team members that look like themselves, right? And you observe that, diversity happens by default, right? You have to be intentional about it, meaning that during the interview process, you have to place emphasis in what matters most to bring the best candidate to the role. If you place emphasis on degrees, pedigrees, GPAs, height, how the person looks, you're not going to get a diverse group of folks, right? So I talk about this because it's one of the things that I feel very proud about, and is the fact that for corporate roles and for any role, except for if they're a specialty, like if we're recruiting a lawyer, we require someone that has a law degree, but we don't require degrees, right? We don't require degrees. And the simple fact of us not requiring that allows team leaders to look at all the attributes that are important to bring the person to the role. And as a byproduct, you end up hiring the best person for the role, regardless of where they went to school or, what pedigree or how many names they dropped during the interview. So, and I'm not saying that having an Ivy League background is going to hurt you when you come and interview at Whole Foods. That is the opposite. I mean,
right.
But that's not what becomes the main driver for making a decision, right? Now, we do have a lot of room for improvement as it relates to making our interview process more structured. What we do really well is setting different data points where we have different people interviewing folks. At the end, we also have a panel interview where there are different data points, and we try to find the consistencies, right? And it takes longer. It's more effort, but at the end, when you're making a hiring decision, which should take longer, which should require effort, because from both sides, right? And I do have a point of view here on the candidate side. It yields to bring in someone that stays at the company. So at Whole Foods Market, for the most part, people stay, and sometimes you see folks that stay for 40 years, 30 years, 20 years, 15 years, 10 years, and that's because they like the company, the products, they feel proud about their work. And if it stays longer on the forefront to bring the person, but they end up staying longer, it's good return for the investment, right?
Definitely. What in terms of, we talk a little bit about, I know we've talked about this kind of potential versus experience. It's kind of it's a and it's kind of tricky to navigate the whole DEI conversation, to be honest. Like I think we talk a little bit about, should we remove information when we share resumes and things like that? Should we take names off of resumes to not add bias? Should we remove photos, right? Things like that to reduce bias. If we find a diverse candidate, should we make sure that's clear and well known to hiring managers to be able to boost those numbers and things like that? Where do you kind of fall on that? Do you think we should be maybe removing information and trying to make more fair decisions by not making snap judgments, to your point, on university degrees or Ivy League degrees, or names or photos or even resumes? Or where do you sit on that?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to remove and scale something like this when you have 300 recs to fill, right? And I have biases, you have biases. I mean, we are human beings that have biases, and there's so many different kinds of biases that what we can do is to help the process to become as objective as possible, right? And take the content as opposed to someone's name, or as opposed to someone's trajectory, or as opposed to whatever someone puts on their resume. But take the content, and this is again going back to Honeit, because it's one of those mechanisms that can help you share what Nick said and the content of that response, as opposed to 3 bullet points that he said on the resume. So removing everything but the content and finding consistent themes as you move people through the funnel, I think is what will help us remove those biases. I do feel that you have to have chemistry with the person that you hire.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and vice versa. The candidate needs to have that opportunity to meet with the hiring team leader, and hopefully in person. But now that we're, all working from home, and at least via Zoom, have an authentic conversation about their leadership style, how they want to be led, what they look for on ideal leaders, and develop. I mean, people don't leave companies, but they leave leaders, right? So it's important to have a very authentic conversation and transparent conversation with the person that you'll hire. So it's a combination of setting a very structured process that looks for objectivity, but at the end of the day, also ensuring that the candidate and the person have that opportunity to come with their eyes as wide open as possible.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, because it's a fit. And I know the word culture fit and things like that are kind of poo-pooed, right? Nobody's, it's a bad word and things like that. But I think you're right. Like, people want to enjoy their work life. People want to enjoy working with people. That's just 70% of our waking life is work. So
and
it's like you want to work with people you enjoy working with. And so. Yeah.
If people and going to the offices it's like when you went to your college campus and you felt like for 5 seconds, like, I can picture myself in this college campus, right? But if you're going to spend so much time at the office, even when maybe now it's a hybrid environment, you should like the office, the vibe. You should enjoy the place where you will spend, 8 hours of your day, right? And I try to also bring that closer to candidates that are remote. I do virtual tours.
That's great. It's good.
Yeah. But again, the recruiter carries that persona. The recruiter, it's an ambassador of the company, and transparently, the candidates should feel that they have an advocate, and they can ask the questions that will make them feel, if that's the next place for them to, establish their careers.
Andres, in your call guides, when you're interviewing folks, do you have any, does your team have any kind of structured questions specific to some of the core values of Whole Foods, where you'd ask, a head of marketing or a head of operations, or it doesn't matter the role, but it's like, either why are you interested in Whole Foods, or which value do you relate to on our career site the most? Or, I mean, is that part of your structured interview process?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But and we do have our leadership principles and have questions that stem out of our leadership principles. But the key is to, and I actually share questions in advance with candidates.
Okay.
But the key is to be a good interviewer and have probing questions.
The follow-up, right? The follow-up questions.
And have a follow-up questions and ask for those results and throw a question that may not be on the script, right? And I do believe that assessing for potential is harder, right? Because you're trying to ask someone to provide an example of something that they haven't done. You're trying to, it's easy to ask someone for a specific example of when you had a challenge with a coworker, but situational interviews that will help me see the potential of Nick becoming the CEO of Whole Foods Market. Well, that's a bad example because you're the CEO of your company, so you've been in that role before. But let's say we had a VP of meat, seafood, and poultry role open. Can Nick be that person, right? And asking the right question to see if you have the potential to become something that you've never done. I think that's where we can find the gems. We can find people who will also be affordable, right? I mean, we're looking for folks that have 20 plus years of experience doing X, Y, and Z. Like they have already maxed out their salary ranges, and it becomes challenging. But if we can find folks with the potential to become amazing at doing that one thing, that is the role of a great recruiter, to find how to present that to your leaders, right?
Right. I mean, we've all seen a 10 out of 10 on paper, but you're right. You're going to pay 140% of your approved salary for that 10 out of 10 on paper. Well, do you go to a 9 out of 10? Do you go to an 8 out of 10? I think I love where you're going with this. And we talk about, the term human capital. Some people go either way on that, thinking it's like a negative term, but I think it's just a way of defining that, if you see a 7 out of 10 on paper, Andres, right, it can be difficult to get that hiring manager excited about a 7 on 10 on paper, right? Like that high potential candidate, because they haven't done that one thing or don't have that one checkbox that we're looking for. But I think you're right. That's the goal of the recruiter, is like, if we know it when we hear it. The candidate says something, that diamond in the rough, that spark, that thing is like, this person could be the head of meat, poultry, and right. And you're like, how do we then, back to your first point, determine if this person has the kind of the strategy piece, that they can come up with a strategic direction for that part of the company, and then two, get people to follow them, right? And it may not just be about the experience, but it's also about, if someone doesn't have that experience, would people still listen to them? Like, would people still follow them?
And this can be done with more science. And this is where I challenge companies and recruiters to invest in adding science to understanding not just the question, but what is the right answer to that question for your company. Because a team member that is a top performer at Whole Foods Market, it's a different person than a top performer at another company, right? So first you have to invest in assessing and understanding, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being high, how positive are you? Someone at Whole Foods Market may say 9. And someone at, another retailer may say 6, but 6 may be the conceptual match for them. And that's the answer that I need to listen for as a recruiter. So I think a good recruiter with years and with understanding of a blueprint for the company, they sort of know this, but in partnership with your IO psychologist and a tool, you could come up with a questionnaire and answers that will help to be more accurate and more objective, right?
I love it. I mean, even for years, we've always talked about how can we ask better questions, better interview questions, better questions. But I think with the advent of new tools and technology around interviewing, we're going to start to be able to unlock, to your point, yeah, what are the best answers we've ever heard? Or more interesting, what are the best answers for our company or our department or even at that micro team culture, right? There's
Totally
different answers at different even different hiring managers, would hear the same answer to a question and rate that candidate differently. So we ultimately want to even get better about, if I talk to a great marketing coordinator and I have 17 marketing coordinator roles open with 17 different hiring managers, how can we start to understand which hiring manager would resonate with this particular candidate, and then make it easy, make that interview experience for the candidate easier too, so they don't have to speak with 17 different hiring managers to try to get alignment there. So
yeah. And my advice for candidates looking for a role is to focus on the companies and the roles that they absolutely love, right? Maybe the company doesn't have a role open, but at some point that role is going to become open. I mean, it took me 10 years to get to Whole Foods. Sometimes people spend 3 months or a month or 6 years. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. But you have to put a lot of time in building these resumes, these collaterals to speak to the roles. What we see now is that it's so easy for people to apply that you're randomly applying for all these jobs. Resumes come just with like a random objective. Why would you not take the time? I mean, you spend time, dating your future spouse because you're going to be with that person forever. And same with your role. You have to, is it hard? Of course it is, right? But most people want to make it easy and take the shortcut and interview or take interview tips and tricks and be prepared for. No, you have to spend like hours a day looking at collateral for that company, understanding what the company is about. There's so much out there about each company. And when you do have that interview, you are going to interview like as you were one of them, and it'll pay off. And I know that because I interview every day, and I know when I have someone that absolutely needs to be at Whole Foods, there's affinity with everything, but because the person has to spend a lot of time doing it, and hopefully, I think you had a question on your email about the future of recruiting and kind of what's going to happen this year. I think there's going to be a lot of boomerangs and people going after all these opportunities that offer, great salaries and, hybrid or remote work environment. But people are going to go back to the companies that offer purpose, that offer meaning, that offer, balance, that care for not just what they produce, but that care about people. So it's, companies don't need to get frustrated. Like we may be losing some talent with some aggressive companies out there, but we need to still be focused on what makes Whole Foods Market a great place to work, letting people be their whole selves, working on our EVP. And we're actually doing some work on that because that will have the most return on the investment. And anyway.
And I think you're right. And solving meaningful problems, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know if there's anything more meaningful than healthy food and what we put into our body, right? Like that's a very ambitious and meaningful goal that I would imagine you can attract great minds and great talent to help you solve that. So
yeah, for some people is that, for some other people is maybe going to space, and but go after those things that you are going to stand behind and be very passionate about, because it is much more fun to do that when you're doing it, for 8 hours a day, when work doesn't feel like work, but it just feels like it's in harmony with your life. It's, I think it's more fun.
Let's end on that. Wonderful. Andres, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Again, we're all ears when it comes to feedback on Honeit, and I always appreciate your suggestions and feedback on the platform. Thank you, everybody. Andres Traslavina, Head of Executive Recruiting at Whole Foods Market.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks so much.